Today, I'm super excited to interview someone who I recently met in Miami Sellers Conference, who's absolutely smashing the wholesale game on Amazon, but in particular to learn about how they've done it, also the financing behind it, and to share any tips and secrets that might be able to, say, glean out of this interview with you to help you in your Amazon journey. Stay tuned, because today I'm interviewing FBA Michaela, who is someone who's got an amazing story that I'm happy to share with you. Stay tuned. Okay, so today I'm super excited to be able to interview FBA Michaela, and in particular, why? Because I met her in Miami Sellers Conference and I watched her presentation and it was absolutely incredible. Her story has been from, should we say, just massively grown an Amazon business, and I think is an inspiration to all of us. So I just want to say, Michaela, thank you so much for joining me and taking time out of your busy day. If anyone doesn't know who you are, can you explain a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and obviously the business that you're operating right now?
So I'm obviously FBA Michaela, or Michaela. I am from the Midwest. I live in Ohio, and I started selling on Amazon a little over a year ago now.
Wow. And let me bring it back. So can I ask, how old are you?
I just turned 23.
23. And I know it's a really bad question to ask a girl. My girlfriend's going to hate me. She's like, no, don't do that. So the question I want to ask is why did you get started on Amazon? What was the whole point behind it?
Wait, time out. I'm 24, not 23.
That's okay. And why did you get started? Why Amazon?
So I got into eBay. I was in eBay for probably 4 or 5 months, but then before that, I did just local Facebook marketplace selling consoles, GPUs, anything that was hot, like collectible toys. And then obviously the GPU market kind of crashed whenever Bitcoin, fell. And I was like, I need something more sustainable, something longer term. So then one of my friends at the time, he was into Amazon. So then I ended up getting into Amazon as well. And then I actually quit the first time I did it because I couldn't get ungated in anything. And I was like, this is just stupid. Why am I doing this? And then I ended up getting an opportunity to join a little mentoring group. And yeah, pretty much the rest is history now.
So you started off, right now, if you don't mind asking, what's the model you're doing right now? And are you able to share last year's top line revenue? Is that possible?
Yeah, so originally I was mostly wholesale. I mean, mostly OA, and now I am mostly wholesale. So I did 1.5 million in my first 12 months.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And so a question for you, obviously, I understand you're doing eBay, you're doing GPU flipping, Bitcoin, I really understand that. You started off OA, and then that's a transition I get. Why the move into wholesale? And how long ago was that?
So I started my transition, I think it was September-ish. I didn't think I placed my first order till October. I mostly got into it just because I kept hitting that 120K month in revenue. And I was like, I had to do something to change this, or I'm just going to keep, hitting that mark. So the only thing that I could think of at the time was double down on my best-selling ASINs for OA and then transition into more wholesale with my other time.
And what does that look like when you say, I'm guessing when you talk about the 120K kind of revenue, that's you were capping at that? That's the maximum you were able to achieve?
Yeah, I think I had 1 month that was close to 150, but that was during back to school. So I had a lot of hot selling bolos type, not replenishables. So then after that, that's when I kind of fell back down to 120. And then I was kind of just steady at that mark.
Operationally wise, is it just yourself? Do you have VAs? Do you do prep centers? What does that look like now?
Well, I had a VA on and off for the first 6 months of my selling journey, but I didn't have one consistently. I did prep here at my house. My family helped me. Didn't have a prep center until I think it was June or July. I was doing 60, 70K of sales at my house, worth of inventory. It was crazy. And then eventually I hired a prep center, and then now I obviously own the Oregon Prep Center. So I send all my stuff there. And then I also have 3 VAs working for me for wholesale.
Okay, cool. So question for you, why didn't you do, you've done the VA side now for wholesale, why didn't you do the VA side for OA? What was the kind of I'm not going to do this?
I think I just got really good at the niche that I was in, and I could just source really well. And when I did hire one, I would obviously let them do their leads and everything, and I'd check over them. And then I was just constantly picking my leads over theirs. So I was like, I don't really need to hire somebody if I'm going to constantly pick my own leads. So there's no point of me hiring somebody. So I guess I never found the right fit for my team. for OA.
And when you did, because I'm really interested, like, because I'm sure a lot of people watching this, they're maybe doing OA, thinking about wholesale. That transition point about what are the limiting factors behind it? What did you try in the OA before you said, okay, no, I'm going to leave and go into the wholesale side? That's the vision. Like, I'm really interested to understand more around the kind of like the metrics, the numbers, the decision metrics or decision around that. Like, what was it that you were quite niche down in the OA side, or were you quite broad? What was the situation around there?
I was pretty niche. I'd say 90% of my stuff was in like apparel and clothing. I had a little bit of shoes, but it was mostly had a little bit of beauty too. But like I said, like 90% was apparel and clothing. So I was pretty niche down. I don't know. I guess I struggled a little bit to break past that 120K, and I didn't want to have to keep putting more time into it and not see the results from it. So that's when I was like, hey, maybe we should introduce just a little bit of wholesale. If you don't like it, then obviously I still had like my best-selling ASINs. Like I said, I doubled down on those to kind of help me transition smoothly into it, so I wasn't sacrificing a bunch of profit in my sales when I did make that transition.
I don't want to jump into the wholesale side yet. Are you still doing similar product selection in wholesale as you were in OA, or is it completely different now?
No, I completely 180 my business, and I've done it multiple times actually in the last like 6 months. But no, I do not sell any clothing or apparel anymore.
Especially obviously with the change in the return rates or like the return fees, it's like a dangerous place to be in now, or not as lucrative as it was, should we say. Question for you. So you talked about the 120 as like the cap in revenue. Could I ask, and it sounds like you were pretty much doing it all on your own, apart from family helping you to prep, and you were starting the prep center, not like the ownership, but you were using one then. Like, what does a typical day look like for yourself when you're doing 120 a month in sales and the majority of the work yourself? Can you run me through that?
Yeah, that's when I started getting into the habit of waking up at 6:30 in the morning. I did a lot of FBM, so I would do my FBM orders first, get those prepped and ready to go out for whenever the mail lady came. She used to come at like 10 o'clock, so I had to have those obviously out pretty quickly. Now she comes in the evening. They got like special permission for her to kind of like loop back around in the afternoon whenever she has like no packages left, so that way she doesn't have to make like 5 trips to go back and forth. So I did that mostly, and then it just depended on the day. I could have been doing a lot of sourcing. I could split up my time up between sourcing and prepping, but a majority of the time was spent prepping because I had so much stuff here at my house. So that's where I was like, yeah, it's probably not a good idea to spend a majority of my time prepping stuff and not have products, going to prep. Like if you don't source enough, you're not gonna have anything to prep. So I knew I had to make the transition, and it was hard because I'm super detail oriented and I am a big perfectionist and I don't like to like let control go, but it ended up being like the best thing for me, and I've grown so much just because I kind of let that piece go.
Sorry, once again, I think that's a really good point. I want to make note of that. Let control go. I love that one. So give me an idea. You were doing FBM. Were you doing FBA at this time as well, or was it just FBM?
No, I did a split. Okay. It was probably, depending on the time of year. So back to school, I would say maybe 70-30, 70% FBA, 30% FBM. And then talking about like quarter 4, like December, I was probably close to 80 or 90% FBM.
Wow. So you really ramped up the FBM side. And then, and before you moved into wholesale, when you were doing OA, you had the prep center, was that right? Or you not owned it, should we say you were using one, would that be correct?
Yeah, I was still using the I2 at the time.
Fine. And if I just kind of clarify, so you said I woke up at 6:30 in the morning. I'd do 6:30 in the morning till probably, let's call it 10 a.m., 10:30, or maybe 11 because, the person turns up, you've got to give them all the parcels. And then 11 a.m. to when, what would happen after that?
So I usually take a nap because I like to get up early, and sometimes I go to bed late. And it's just like, just energizes you again. So I do take a nap for maybe an hour or so. And then after that, it's right back to either prepping or sourcing again until I go to bed. And I usually go to bed around 10 o'clock if it's a good day.
Okay. And in a
I spend a lot of
hey, look, do not get me wrong. Like, what you've achieved is incredible. And I think the one thing I kind of really I see is that everyone looks at FBA and thinks, oh, it's a great life, you get to do all these things. But like the people who are successful are really hustling. And the reason why I ask you around the time is the fact that if you want to be successful, you've got to put the work in. There is no substitute for that. Can I ask you the question, on a typical day, how many hours would you spend sourcing? to be able to achieve 120K in sales?
So I wasn't as, I guess, gung-ho about sourcing and really dedicated to it when I first started. So like the first maybe 4-ish months. And then I started seeing obviously the results of proof of concept. And I was like, man, like how far can I really take this? Because at the time I wasn't planning on doing this full time. I never had the intention of doing this full time because I had a medical school acceptance already. And so that wasn't my goal in life. I didn't wake up and tell my mom when I was in kindergarten, hey mom, I'm going to be an Amazon seller. That's just how it was. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor since I was like 5 years old. So that's what I anticipated doing. So didn't put a whole lot of effort into it at first. I mean, I did obviously, but not as much as I could have. And then once about 5 or so months into it, that's whenever I started really hustling, and I really put myself in the trenches. And I was doing at least 6-hour days sourcing for the whole month of June, and some of July. I'd say probably on average 8 hours.
If I'm thinking about it, so you're pretty much doing like, I'm doing some math in my head really badly, 4 hours in the morning FBM, 1 or 2 hour nap, shoving some food in there quickly, 8 hours sourcing, and then maybe back into FBM/FBA to get shipments off the last package, should we say, and maybe in the evening carrying back onto sourcing again right until 10 o'clock at night. So it's like a very full-on day. Is that right?
Yeah. I tried my best to kind of, do sourcing every day of those days, but some days, I had prep. So if I had to send a shipment out that week, then obviously prep prioritized sourcing. And that's obviously when I kind of put 2 and 2 together and was like, Michaela, if you're spending more time prepping when you could be sourcing, then obviously it's time to make a change. So that's when I ended up making that change.
And would that just be Monday to Friday, or were you working all weekend as well?
No, all days.
Wow.
There was no weekend. There was no weekend in my world.
Do you know what's really funny is some people are like, oh my God, like that's stupid. Why are you doing it? And like, I think on the other side is like, wow, you're achieving something, and what you've achieved in such an incredibly short amount of time. By the time you hit 30, you're gonna be like, I'm done, I'm retired. Like I'm retired really, really well. Quick question before I come back to the wholesale side. What is the long-term goal? Why do you do it? Why do you work 7 days a week, like 15-hour days?
Because I see the long term. I want to be able to retire when I'm young. I don't want to retire when I'm, 80 years old. I want to be able to enjoy my good health as much as possible. And if you wait till you're, 70s, 60s, you're not going to be able to enjoy as much. So I do everything that I can just to help me retire early and be able to live off my assets and not have to work anymore.
Nice, I like it. And obviously you made the investment into the prep center, so you're creating assets already. Can I ask you a question? Someone's going to obviously comment down below, I promise you this. Well, if you're working that much, you're not going to have any health to be able to enjoy when you retire because you're working so much. What would you say to that?
I mean, I can see that. I think you have to be able to moderate what you do. And obviously if you need to take breaks in between, that's fine. But like whenever I commit to something, I put full effort into it. And I guess I'm just used to the grind mode because I do come from the pre-med background, and it's a rat race. It's just a giant rat race. So I'm used to working, and I'm used to, putting my effort into something because I know that if I do work really hard for a short amount of period of time, that it will pay off, and then I can enjoy those for my labor.
And what's really interesting, the way I think about it is 2 things. I worked in the bar industry, so I'm used to working like 6 o'clock in the morning, like 15 hours on your feet non-stop. So grind. But the other one, so I'm quite happy grinding, like I don't mind that. But I think the other one I really think about is by working more, you understand something which is working today, and you're compressing down time into a shorter time, but also you're able to, should we say, take advantage of something a lot more effectively because you're because you're compressing it down into the time which is working. For example, you talked about flipping GPUs. There was only a certain time period that opportunity was available. And the more you work during that time, the more you can take advantage of it. I think, well done to you for doing it. Question for you, OA, 120. You talked about it earlier. I 180'd my business so many times. You said also about letting go of control. So let's talk about 180. Let's talk about the transition to wholesale. Talk me through the mindset. Talk me through that decision metrics. Talk me through why make that change. Surely you're making good money.
Yeah, it ultimately boiled down to you kind of have to figure out that point where you're putting in X amount of time and getting X or getting Y out. You have to make sure that what you're putting in, you are getting out. You don't want to put so much in and see, I'm not seeing the results from it. So that's when I was like, I know if I can, put this time into wholesale, that eventually I can start to phase myself out of my business and I don't have to work as long. And that was like my biggest biggest goal was to slowly start removing myself from my business so that I could work on other ventures, because I do have other businesses outside of my Amazon store. But I got pretty lucky when I first started doing wholesale, because I did find a really good VA. Obviously, it's no substitute for actual knowledge in doing it. You need to obviously know what you're doing and have a good idea of how to teach somebody how to do something. You can't just teach somebody something you don't already know how to do. So he was really good. We both learned from each other, and that was like the best part, because we kind of grew together. He already had experience running a 7-figure store, and so that was very helpful, because he did have some ideas and some tips that I didn't even know at that point in time, because I wasn't even a 7-figure seller at that point when I hired him. It was great. I got really lucky. I hired my first one about maybe 3 or so weeks into my journey of doing wholesale. Then he ended up having really good success with the ways that we, find suppliers, and he ended up opening a bunch of accounts. And then he's like, "Hey, Michaela, I really need somebody to help me go through the catalog." So then I hired on my second VA, and then now we're up to 3. And that third spot was the hardest one to fill, because I kept interviewing people, and they're like, "Yeah, I know how to do all this," and like they talk the talk and everything, and then whenever it was time to walk the walk, they just didn't have any clue what they were doing. So I ended up, going through probably 4 or 5 different people. And then we finally hired my main VA's wife. So everybody kind of knows each other. My second VA worked for my first VA at the last store that he was at. So they all know each other. They work really well. Like I said, I got very lucky with my team. They're fantastic.
But I think one thing I will just kind of like, I've hired a lot of VAs in time, but I think the one thing I would also just kind of put there is, you talked about your third VA, like there's a lot of people you interviewed. It sounds like you had a high standard, you had high expectations, and you held people to it. And I think that's a really important point. It wasn't just like, oh, I hired someone, we were really lucky. Like, yes, you said that on the first one, but when you weren't satisfied with the quality, you still said no, and you kept going through. It wasn't just like, I think it's, you said it, I have a high standard, I have high expectations, some high quality control, which I think is fantastic. Let me ask you a question. I just want to come back to you said about time for money, like I need to start doing that. Can you tell me more about like the metrics, the numbers, what was the realization when you're like, I need to do the 180, I need to quit OA? Because people will be like, you're making good money, what are you doing changing this business? Like, what does that look like?
I think I started to get burnt out from the 8 hours of sourcing and not seeing my sales go any higher. Like they just kept stagnant. Obviously 120K, I was making good money. I'm not going to say I wasn't, but I felt for the time that I was putting in and the energy I was putting in that I need more out of it. So that's when I was like, yep, we got to make some kind of change here.
A question for you, you're feeling burnt out, you're struggling, and you decide to hire someone. Surely it takes a lot of time to get them right in training. Because what's really interesting is your first VA, you said you were very lucky, but the way you talked about him, is it him? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said he was sharing information, telling you that he's struggling, he needed someone else. I would probably say he's more consultative to you rather than a yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, what do you want, ma'am? How did that relationship get developed? How did you develop that first VA's relationship to be such a great working relationship?
I think it's just all about communication and being open and honest and being trusting these individuals. Some people will track, their VAs and see what they're doing and everything. And I have the philosophy that if I can't trust you, then you have no part of being in my business. And I know I can get burnt very easily with that and I have to watch, but I don't know. I guess my business is built on, values like trust, honesty.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is having met a lot of people, a lot of businesses are built on trust, and that's a really important point. And what we see is when businesses start to go down is people are not holding those values, not holding that trust to where they should be, and not saying, no, this is I'm not accepting this. They look at but if I let them go, I'm going to have to do more work, and I don't want to do the more work. Whereas you're like, I will do the work, I don't care, but my values stay. Would that be right?
Yeah. I mean, I would take on all of the burden again and do it all over. I mean, if I had to. I mean, that is just such a big part of my business, that the values. If there's no trust, if you're not honest with me, you're not able to communicate with me well, then, like I said,
Question for you. You talked about 180s. Tell me about them. Tell me about the 180s you've done. How do you think about changing it? Like, I got the change from OA to wholesale. You said you've done it many times, since then. I'm guessing product mix has changed. Like, how do you recognize that? How do you have the courage to do it? How do you know when I have to do it? Tell me about those 180s.
So my first 180 obviously was going from almost all OA to wholesale within a few months. I'm now 100% wholesale. I mean, I do have some OA inventory that I'm still selling through, but I've not purchased anything OA since maybe mid-December. So that's like my first 180. Obviously it's scary, but once you kind of have that in your head, like it's a risk, but you've gotten where you are now because of the risk that you've taken already. So like if I didn't take the risk to start selling on eBay, I wouldn't have sold on Amazon. And then obviously if I didn't take the risk on Amazon, I wouldn't be talking about wholesale anyway. So obviously just taking risks, that's what it boils down to. And then my next 180 was obviously I don't sell in apparel and clothing anymore. So I started doing more grocery and I thought that was going to be my niche. I thought I was going to do really well with that. And then my world got rocked and it didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be. Not that I think there's anything wrong with selling grocery, but it's just not my pace. And I guess because I come from stuff that sells really fast and I don't know, the profit margins were really good. So just going to that kind of like stunned me a little bit. So then that's whenever I made another 180 and switched to actually electronics. Now I do electronics and higher end, which I do really like.
My God. And obviously, because it's a big change, but like, are you not worried about, should we say, jumping ship and obviously like the new ship not being right? Or is it like, no, I'm not staying on this ship. This is where I'm going to be.
No. I didn't like it, so that's when I was like, make a change and do it. I just like I said, if I am really into something, I'm gonna go full force into it. So I wasn't going to let it fail. Like I knew that what I had to do, and I knew it wasn't going to fail. Like there was no way I was gonna let the ship sink on me.
No, I understand. I like that. I think it's really good. And by God, we always have those changes. So thank you. Question for you. Obviously, your revenue is 7 figures, so absolutely amazing. One thing I did ask you is financing. Can you tell me about how do you finance this? What does that look like? Where have you struggled? What advice can you give for other people? Is that okay?
So when I first started, I had 10K of cash built up from my eBay business, and that's what I always recommend to start with. Obviously, when you're starting out, play with your own money so that way you're not in debt to somebody else. So the last thing I want to see is people open up credit cards and then them not be able to pay them off. So obviously use your own money first, kind of get the proof of concept. And then once you feel like you have good money management skills and you're picking the right products, then you can move to a business credit card. And I started with the blue card with American Express. And then I used that. And then I had personal cards that I had to use because my credit was bad. So that improved my score and I ended up getting a Plum card in the summer. And that's when I really started to pick up because the Plum card had a way higher limit than my blue card because it only had 10,000 on it. And then my Plum card started with 25,000 internal. And then now I can spend over 100K on it. So that changed. And then obviously in between those periods of time, I was offered multiple, I think 5 total now from Amazon. And it ranged from 11K. And then the last one I just took was 81,000. So I've been taking those loans. And then I'm looking into outside sources now that work with Amazon sellers, like Sellers Funding. And I'm working on another source that hopefully that we can make kind of a partnership and I can promote them and stuff because if they end up turning out good.
Nice. Hey, honestly, I really like it. I think, I love your advice about do it on your personal. I always say this is everyone looks at the big numbers and they're like, you need to buy more, you need to buy more. And it's so easy to open up credit cards and do it. But if you don't know if you're profitable, all you're doing is turning a bad business to an even worse business with a lot of debt. So I really love that. Use your own money. And I love how the fact you say, you had 10,000, which I think is a fantastic amount. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I love the fact that question for you, why are you looking at external providers other than outside Amazon Loan? Why not just stay with Amazon Loans and do it that way in credit cards?
Because I've just reached the point where I have a lot of credit cards and a lot of inquiries on my credit. So credit cards right now are hard. And then if I want to do a traditional loan or a line of credit through these people, then I have to be in business for 2 years. And I'm not in business yet for 2 years. I've only been just a little over a year now. So that's kind of hard. So yeah, I'm just looking for external sources, people that don't require 2 years in business that work with Amazon sellers, because those people tend to be a little bit more friendly because they know how the business works. And you can be super successful and only been selling for a year. It's not like a traditional business in some senses. So that's just like the biggest, I guess, hurdle for me right now is capital, because I have plenty of opportunity.
No, I really understand. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you're super, super busy. So if anyone wants to get in contact, what's the best way to get in contact with yourself?
Just on Twitter, Instagram. I'm on Discord too. It's just FBA Michaela.
Fantastic. And if anyone wants to know, what I will do is I'll drop links down below, so obviously you can access that as well. So, Michaela, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you obviously for sharing. And hopefully, maybe in a year's time, I can pop out, see how your actual journey is going, and maybe do a video in person, and obviously see how far you've grown. And obviously, I know you've done a lot of other assets, like the Prep Center you kind of talked a bit about here, but also see where the Amazon business has gone, and maybe see some other 180s that have happened, and obviously learn from that experience as well. So I just want to say thank you so much for everything you shared, and obviously I look forward to hearing about the updates in the coming year.